Hi, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. As you know, this is a place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain what is most factual and logically consistent. So, today I'm going to be talking about why you shouldn't trust Tucker Carlson on Israel Palestine. Anyone who's familiar with this channel will know that for the past few months have been covering Tucker Carlson's content. And by and large, I agree with a lot of the things that he says. So anyone who has been listening to Tucker Carlson for the past year would suddenly realize that he's making a lot of sense on some issues, particularly on Israel Palestine. He's making valid points, points that are correct. His critique is mostly spot on. But is that enough to trust Tucker Carlson? Is that enough to just let go of all the things that this man has done in the past? Is it enough to think that this man is genuine? He's a genuinely changed person because he's changed his rhetoric on Muslims, he's changed his rhetoric on some other things, right? Is it enough? Should you trust Tucker Carlson? Should you trust people on the right who are suddenly now very pro Palestine, who are suddenly now very pro oppressed groups? Or is there something else there? Is there a sinister motive behind what they are doing? Now, to help us understand this better, I'm going to cover what Professor Norman Finkelstein, who was asked this question on Heard, and he gave a very beautiful analysis of what he thinks is going on with not just someone like Tucker Carlson, but with someone like Candace Owens as well. So I'm going to be covering that in this stream. But before we get into that, if you'd like to support this channel, you can get my crime fiction novel is on Amazon, and also my book of poetry, which is also on Amazon. You could like, share, and subscribe to this channel so that the word can get out there. So let's get into the conversation for today. Should you trust Tucker Carlson?
What we're particularly keen to kind of investigate is what is happening on the political right. And I just want to draw you back to that, because what you've said is much more of a broad, your analysis that in your view, what you're calling the billionaire Jewish class, etc., overreached and pressurized too much, and there was natural hostility, etc. But there's something else happening, isn't there, which is quite separate to that, which is you went on Candace Owens' podcast, for example, and some of the things she's saying about Jewish people are kind of very different. They really do call in to play ancient, weird tropes about Jews. There's a whole new, very strange thing going on. Tell us what you observed there. You went on her podcast.
The right is not known for its support for national liberation struggles. It's not known for its support for self-determination of peoples. It doesn't have a particularly happy record on compassion for the poor or compassion for Muslims. So it is a point of, let's call it curiosity. Why is it that we're no longer talking about opposition to foreign wars? We're not talking about just likes, shares, and views, but we've suddenly discovered this huge outpouring of compassion for poor, brown-skinned Muslims in Gaza, and outrage at this genocide that Israel has perpetrated there. Now, that doesn't sound like the profile of the right. It's not the right.
And that is very correct. And I would highlight it with an example of a clip that I came across yesterday of Chris Christie. He was being asked by Hassan Minaj that would he support a policy? Would he support a policy of, the policy that about universal, I think universal basic education, or a policy. Some if Zoran Mamdani was, for example, was to institute a policy that would take care of children, every child in America, maybe a free school lunch for every child in America. Would he support such a policy? And he said no. And the reason he said no, he was like, no, they're not all our kids, because Hassan was like, but this benefits all our kids, this benefits everyone. And he said, no, that they are not all our kids. So the right doesn't have any track record of compassion for anybody who is not within their group. Anybody who is not within, they have compassion for their in group. They have compassion for probably their family members or people who share the same ideology with them. And if you want to radiate outwards, yeah, they'll have compassion for concentric rings of people who are related to them in different spheres. But as a general rule, they do not have compassion for groups that they think are the out group. So that is why Chris Christie would be comfortable with saying he cannot support a policy that institutes free food for every American kid. Mind you, these are the same people who would say a woman cannot have an abortion. I don't support abortion. I'm anti-abortion anyway. They're the ones that would say a woman cannot support abortion because you are taking away a human life, which is correct, by the way. But then immediately that life is born, you feel that there is no responsibility of the state, of society towards that life. You feel that anything that you can do to support that life is problematic. Any social policies to support those same children that you are fighting for their right to be born. Now they are born, you cannot even fight for their right to live well, to live a good life. So where is all that? Where is your pro-life thing when it comes to that? Are you only just pro-life when it comes to the child being in the mother's womb? What's happening there? So Finkelstein is right. The right has no track record of compassion. So you begin to question when you see them taking up courses for groups that they traditionally do not have compassion for. It begins to beg the question, what is happening here?
That I know of. I mean, you're old and you're not old enough to remember, but during the apartheid era, the last holdouts in support of South Africa were Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. That was the right. That's the right that I know. And I don't think the leopard has changed its spots.
So what do you think is going on then?
First of all, there has to be a perplexity. You can't pretend as if something odd is not happening here. Something odd is happening here. And then the question is, what exactly is happening? Why this sudden outpouring of compassion for the people of Gaza? Now, before I answer the question, one caveat. Of course, I'm happy when they say it. I think about 60 to 70% of what Tucker Carlson says is true. I don't quarrel with facts. I wish it had been a person of the left who are saying it to the audience of his size. People of the left are saying it, but to audiences there are much smaller quantity, maybe more quality, but it's much smaller quantity. And I wish a person of the left had his outreach. But I'm not going to dispute that about 60 to 70% of what he's saying
I feel I have
true.
to comment that 60% true, it doesn't seem like a very high score. It implies 40% untrue, which if your whole shtick is that you are a truth teller, is pretty weak.
Okay, let me amend that, not because I want to score a debating point. I'll amend it to 70% is true, but the 30% still does remain problematic. Now, we'll take the most recent case to show where the lines get so blurry, and then I'm going to answer your question. Where is it coming from? The most recent case was the war in Iran. Tucker Carlson from the get-go, and then everybody else said it was Israel's war. There was no basis for that. That Israel wanted the war? Of course it wanted the war. There's no doubt about that. In 2003, Vice President Cheney and Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, they wanted the war with Iraq. Now, back then, everybody was saying that was Israel's war. That's the central thesis of the book by Mearsheimer and Walt. There was no basis for that. It was Cheney and Rumsfeld's war. They saw an American national interest to topple the regime in Iraq. They then hoped to topple the regime in Syria, and they then hoped to topple the Iranian regime. That was their game plan to exploit to the maximum 9/11. The notion that Cheney and Rumsfeld, who were extremely smart, extremely competent, and 110% looking after U.S. interests, didn't give a flying fig or hoot about Israel. The notion that they were somehow duped or tricked by Israel is just nonsense. And I believe the same thing is true now. Trump operates within the framework of U.S. national interests, but there's obviously an aspect of Trump which is historically unprecedented. It's an extremely personalized presidency in which, whereas Trump in general doesn't go outside U.S. interests, he basically pursues what's in his own interest. But you remember all the claims that were being made by the right wing and the center and the left that the Israelis had the Epstein files and that they were blackmailing Trump, and that's why he went into the war. And Tucker Carlson had a sequence about how poor Trump, he said, poor Trump. I feel so sorry for him. He's up at night and he's squirming. He's so tormented. He's so tortured because the Israelis have the goods on him and he doesn't know what to do. No.
Cartoons make complex ideas easy to understand and are incredibly effective at teaching and...
That is a very interesting point. Now, in the critique that Tucker Carlson makes of the US-Israel-Iran war, it's almost as if they are making excuse for the US. It's almost as if they're saying the US has no agencies in this. The US has very little agency in this, and that Israel is just leading on the US. But that is far from the truth. I mean, the US has had war boner for Iran for a very long time. It's just that Trump has been the only one stupid enough to actually have gone into it. It's in the US interest, it's in US foreign policy interest to actually attack Iran. And in that sense, both the US and Israel are aligned. So the idea with Tucker Carlson and some other people on the right, the idea that the Israel was just dog walking the US into this catastrophic and disastrous war makes absolutely no sense. You are taking away accountability from the US. The US has as much responsibility and accountability in this as Israel does. But the ire is with Israel, not with the Trump administration, not with the US government. It is inconceivable that that Israel will have something on Donald Trump. Is shameless. Donald Trump he doesn't give a shit. Nothing is going to affect him, even if the damning evidence in the Epstein files, you think that's going to make Donald Trump afraid of something? Haven't there been other allegations against him that just rolled off him? You think that's going to make him do something? No. Maybe for financial reasons, maybe for pecuniary reasons, Donald Trump will do something, but he's shameless. So Israel, the idea that Israel blackmailed Trump into this war makes absolutely no sense. Did they try to convince Trump? Did they probably give him some false information to say that this was going to be a short, easy war? Yes, that's within the realm of possibility. But that they strong-armed Trump through blackmail into this war makes no sense. So in that instance, you begin to question Tucker Carlson's his critique. How solid is it? If he is not willing to hold the US accountable, maybe there's something else there.
When Trump decided this war is destroying his presidency and destroying his public image and was on the verge, the cutoff date was supposed to be July, on destroying the U.S. economy, the predictions were if the blockade continues till July, there are going to be huge economic ramifications. What did he do? He ended the war. He signed a memorandum of understanding. He didn't even let Netanyahu see the memorandum of understanding. He then began to attack Israel publicly at the G7 and friends. What happened to the Epstein tapes? What happened to poor tortured Trump, who was up at night sweating and squirming because the Israelis were blackmailing him? It was all complete nonsense.
So why was it being said then? I mean, where is it coming from, this whole mood on the right?
I think it comes from several places. On the right wing, it comes from the place of they want to preserve the U.S.'s virginal good. So whoever is doing evil must be some foreign wire puller who's distorting, U.S. national interests. I think a lot of people just don't have a firm historical knowledge of the situation. But even people who do have a very good knowledge, like Chas Freeman, extremely smart fellow, so knowledgeable. Even he was, the Zionists were behind this whole thing. Well, in 2003, were Cheney and Rumsfeld Zionists? No, not very plausible, not very believable. In any event, so where is it coming from? Now, one caveat, a second caveat, I already entered one. A second caveat, I am not a podcast universe type of person. That's not my thing. I'm old-fashioned. I read books and documents. Having said that, I had to do several interviews where I felt I had to binge for a weekend on just sitting down and listening to Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes, hear what they're having to say. In any event, I did sit down, listen carefully what Tucker Carlson is saying. Now, 70% of what he's saying is true. I know that. I don't quarrel with facts. But then I start hearing things like this. He's talking about Ben Shapiro, obviously a loathsome reptile. There's a broad consensus on that. And he says, Ben Shapiro boasts about sleeping on a bed of money. Shapiro at one point boasted about his wealth and sleeping, he put it on a cushion or on a mattress of money. So then Tucker Carlson says, well, I'm a Christian. Christians aren't so materialistic. They're not just about money. We have spiritual values. So now we have Ben Shapiro, the self-described avatar of Judaism, being the worshiper of mammon. Then I listened to another broadcast, and Tucker Carlson says, I was at a Trump rally about when Trump was elected president, and there was this diminutive woman who I saw on the beside me, and I even though I don't know her, he said it was Miriam Adelson. She's the wife of the billionaire Sheldon Adelson, the casino fortune, and she gave Trump $100 million. And then he says the following. He said, Miriam Adelson, she pushed herself to the front of the line. And he said, I hope that's not an omen for the future. So then I thought to myself, okay, the pushy Jew. So now we have the worshiper of Mammon, Ben Shapiro, and Miriam Adelson, who self-describes herself as more loyal to Israel than to the United States. So now we have the pushy Jew. And then
Yes. And that is Tucker Carlson's, that is his shtick. And in a way, that he's part of his talent, because he sneaks in these sinister things. He just sneaks them in very subtly, that if you're not discerning enough, you are not going to know what he just did. He's going to come with, oh, I'm just asking questions. I'm just with his head shaking. I'm just asking questions. Maybe this is what it means. He's never going to come out and tell you what he really thinks. He has an idea in his head what he's pushing. He's pushing the pushy Jew. He's pushing the Jew that loves money and so on and so forth. But he's not going to come out to say that. He's just going to skirt around it. But his audience, those who, those right-wingers, those white nationalists, they can pick up on such cues and they understand what Tucker Carlson he's talking about. Ben Shapiro, being a Jew, has absolutely nothing to do. I don't think his religion or his Jewishness should be invoked when criticizing Ben Shapiro? Why was it necessary to even bring, oh, we Christians are not very materialistic? Tucker Carlson, you're in the same business as Ben Shapiro. You're making as much money, if not even much more money than Ben Shapiro. So for the fact that Ben Shapiro declares that he sleeps on a ton of money does not make him any more materialistic than you are. For the fact that you haven't declared it that way doesn't mean you are not as materialistic. You're making money, except you're telling me that every money that you're making, you're giving it out in charity. But that's not true. So bringing in, oh, we Christians are not materialistic, or Jews are, yeah, you're playing into anti-Semitic tropes. Yeah. So as much as Ben Shapiro is a piece of shit, as much as what Israel is doing is crazy, and as much as what many Jewish billionaire class, what they are doing in the US in terms of pushing a very pro-Israel stance, as much as what they're doing is wrong, you should be very careful. You should be very, very careful, because these are, after all, the acts of individuals. They are not the representatives of the people. Neither are all Jewish people aligned on this. So when you want to make it an identity of Jewish people, it becomes problematic. And this is one of the problems I have with the right. They are the ones that always preach individual responsibility. But when it is convenient, they just make collective guilt. They will rally around and say, well, why are white people being held responsible for the actions of, their forefathers, of the actions of one white person? Correct. It's a valid question. No white person should be ascribed de facto guilt based on the actions of another white person. But when it comes to other groups, they don't make that distinction. White people are individuals, other people are groups. So it's the blacks who are criminals. It's the Jews who are controlling the American political system. It's no longer the individuals now, it is now their group. But white people get to be individuals. Every other group gets to be the group. They get to be defined by the actions of people within that group.
Listened to another broadcast of Tucker Carlson, and it was a kind of strange broadcast, because Tucker Carlson says, I disagree with Ben Shapiro about Maduro in Venezuela. Ben Shapiro denounces Maduro as being a totalitarian, this, that, and the other. But Tucker Carlson says, no, he is those things for sure. But he says, I kind of like Maduro's social policies. He's anti-gay, he's anti-trans, he's anti-same-sex marriage. And then, okay, those are traditional social policies, and you could see the intersection.
This is an insight into the conservative mind. They are never pro anything, they are always anti something. So that's why conservatives have no positive value that they express, no positive policy position that they put forward. They are always anti something. You're anti-gay, you're anti-trans. You build your whole identity around opposition to something else.
Between Tucker Carlson and Maduro. That makes perfect sense. Though it's odd to hear Tucker Carlson defend Maduro, that's for sure. But then he throws in a fourth one. You might call it the monkey wrench. He says, and Maduro is against usury. So I'm thinking to myself, gay marriage, trans, the trans phenomenon, gay rights. I said, where does usury come into this mix? He says, unlike Ben Shapiro, I'm against usury. So I'm thinking, okay, now we have the mammon worshiping Jew, the pushy Jew, and now we have the usurous Jew, the Shylock. And then I'm listening to some of his broadcasts, and I'm hearing him saying completely true things about how Israel pushed for the war in Iran, no question about that, and persuaded Trump to launch the attack. I think that's correct. I think that Trump knew he assembled a cabinet of buffoons, subpar morons, and he didn't trust them because he knew that's why he chose them, because they're stupid. And so, and because Trump, is a big high IQ guy. He likes to say Somalis are low IQ and he's high IQ. And then, the stereotype, Jews are high IQ. And people like Benjamin Netanyahu boast of it. So I think they did persuade him. It'd be smart Jews. They say it's going to be a cakewalk. The country's going to rise up, and we have all our operatives in place. And remember what we did with Hezbollah. That part all sounded right. But then he said things like Israel and its supporters in the U.S., he said they purposely dragged the United States into the war in Iran because they wanted to destroy the United States. That's what he said.
So, okay, let's take Tucker Carlson's logic to its logical conclusion. Let's say because some American Jews support Israel because they're very pro-Israel, because they're pushing for this war, therefore they are responsible for this. It's the responsibility of all Jews. This is a Jewish problem. But does Tucker Carlson apply that same logic when it comes to evangelical Christians who support Zionism, who are in fact much more pro-Zionist? I'm sure if you do a poll in the US of Jews and evangelical Christians on the support for Zionism, you might find out that evangelical Christians support Zionism much more than American Jews. Mike Huckabee and other American evangelical Christians who support Israel and Zionism. Does Tucker Carlson make this an evangelical Christian problem? Does he make it a Christian problem because many Christians support Zionism? The answer is no, he doesn't do that. So why does he draw the distinction? Why does it make it a Jewish thing and not a Christian thing, when it's exactly the same things that are at play here? So that's yet another reason why, despite him saying things that are true, you've got to be skeptical about his motive.
Because they secretly are hoping for an alliance with Modi's India to replace the United States. Thinking, Modi's India? Where the F did you come up with that? But now we have the mammon worshiping Jew, the pushy Jew, the usurous Jew, and now we have the Jew who's trying, if you read Hitler's Mein Kampf, trying to destroy the country from within. They have an agenda. They have to destroy the United States, to bring it down. I admit.
It is not, there is no way in which it is in Israel's interest to destroy the United States. The US is the biggest supporter of Israel, militarily, politically, internationally, and in almost every sense. The US has a large Jewish population, as much as Israel, as there are almost as many Jews in Israel as you have in the US. So why would Jews want the destruction of the US? Israel on its own cannot stand. It's a country of 10 million people. There is so much it can do. But when you have a country of 300 to 350 million people as an ally and the biggest military and political power in the world, it's in your interest to ensure that they persist. So it makes no sense from every perspective to think that Jews would want the downfall of America so that India can ascend or some other country can ascend. It's so when Tucker Carlson says things like this, you've got to question what are his motives. What are his motives? You've got to question that. It's not just him being stupid. He's not a stupid person. He knows what he's saying. He knows what he's doing. He he makes these allegations without evidence. He just puts them out there, sows the seed in your head so that it begins to germinate. But he does it with plausible deniability. No, I'm just asking questions.
Mr. Carlson is subtle. He is adept at his craft. I will not deny that. And I've received many angry phone calls and angry emails from people who say that I have now become revealed to be a loyalist to my tribe, you know, and unfairly tarring these people. As I said, 3 elements.
Now, this highlights another problem with the right. They demand absolute fealty and loyalty to their position. They demand absolute conformity. They are going to praise Norman Finkelstein for his, you know, stance on Israel, his critical stance on Israel. But God forbid that Norman Finkelstein is concerned about actual anti-Semitism, or he's concerned about the nuances of these conversations. God forbid. I'm not Jewish. I'm not a Jewish person. I'm very critical of Israel. But I do understand that anti-Semitism is a problem and it's not something that should be taken lightly. So, despite the fact that Israel's actions might be causing the rise of anti-Semitism, it is not an excuse for being blind to anti-Semitism. It's not an excuse. It doesn't mean that you don't have to be concerned about it as well. And that the fact that a Jewish person critical of Israel is concerned about it somehow shows that no, they ultimately default to their tribe. No, that's not what it means. But that's what that's what they do. Absolute conformity. It's the same thing with, this token black people, black conservatives, of which, you know, before I used to be, very much more conservative, very much more right wing. And when I started this channel, I had the support of a lot of white conservative people because of all of that. But the moment I began to challenge some of those ideas, they started living, they all started living. That's what happens with black conservatives in America. If you toe the party line, you're going to get overwhelming support. You'll be called a smart black man who can think for himself, who is independent. But God forbid that you say anything that is perceived, even though it is true, to be pro-black. It becomes a problem. They are going to term you that, oh, you have reverted. No, you're just now defending your group, so on and so forth. So he's right. Finkelstein is right in that regard.
Feelings of betrayal over America first, just economics. But then the third element is, I believe, it's problematic.
Is this anti-Semitism then?
It is a kind of exploitation of classical stereotypes about Jews, which I find problematic. Now, people say, what difference does it make as long as he's saying what's true? So my view is, say you're back in the 1930s, you're a person of the left, you have your platform. The platform is an anti-capitalist, pro-socialist platform. And then along comes this far-right party. But strangely, it packages itself in all the language of the left. It calls itself the National Socialist German Workers' Party. So it's now suddenly the far right is packaging itself as socialist, the National Socialist. It's packaging itself as a workers' party. Wait, I thought it was the communists and the socialists which were the workers' party, not the far right. And I think it would be strange if a person of the left were not both perplexed and concerned that a far right party was now packaging itself as a leftist organization.
Do you think that those characters are doing this? They are invoking these concerning stereotypes in order to win power? Do you think they think it's a route, that there is sufficiently widespread, what most people will call anti-Semitism, for it to be a vector to political power?
You have to remember, I don't know how well versed you are in the history of the rise of Hitlerism. Up until 1929, the Nazis weren't polling more than 3 to 5% in German elections. 1929, the next election, its support goes up to 18%, then 30%. The anti-Semitic factor, as Ian Kershaw, a senior British historian, wrote the monumental 2-volume biography of Hitler, he said the anti-Semitism was basically an add-on. That's how he called it. That what accounted for the Nazi rise to power was clearly the economy and the seeming that it had an answer, the appearance that it had an answer. In the same way, right now, I would say this undercurrent would maybe attract 5% of voters, the undercurrent. But if, and I recognize it's a big if the economy were to crash, and that's not beyond possibility, I recognize it's a big if, I do believe this could become a problem. Will it become the major problem? Hard to say. Could it become a problem? Yes, I believe it could become a problem. It could get out of hand, and it won't be just podcasters, but it could be a phenomenon. And that to me should be a grounds for concern. For me, as big a problem, there's a political problem, but there's a kind of, what I would say, a kind of refusal to acknowledge that something weird is happening. I'm 72 years old. I got started in the Israel Palestine conflict in 1982, where Israel invaded Lebanon. Palestinians were not a left-wing cause. And now if you take the top, say, 20 podcasters, the only non-right-wing person represented in the top 20 is Mehdi Hassan. But all the other ones, the right-wing, have latched onto it. Now, with all due regard, am I supposed to believe that Megyn Kelly is up at night worrying about the plight of people in Gaza? That strikes me as so far-fetched.
You've answered our question very well. So,
yeah, very far-fetched. In fact, Tucker Carlson's, in a sense, admits it isn't really about Palestinians per se. It's the fact that he suddenly discovered that there are Palestinian Christians. That's what got Tucker Carlson interested to begin with. Palestinian Christians. So who knows? Maybe if there were no Palestinian Christians, Tucker Carlson would have been silent on the Palestinian issue. Because to him, it is unacceptable that Israel would do anything to harm Christians. That was his, and it goes back to show that right-wing people can only have compassion towards a group to which they can relate. And for Tucker Carlson, it's other Christians. I'm a Christian. I obviously care about what happens to other Christians. But I care about what happens to Muslims too, and to Hindus, I care about what happens to people of other faiths. I'm not going to sit back and turn a blind eye to atrocity happening to someone of another faith just because they are someone of another faith. So who knows, if there were no Palestinian Christians, Tucker Carlson probably would be silent on this issue. So from all this, it it shows that this man cannot be trusted, despite all the seemingly right and correct things that he's saying. And there are those who are going to dismiss Professor Finkelstein and say, "Oh, this is just him, his Jewish side talking and all that." But this man has been as objective as you can possibly be on this issue, and I trust his judgment on that. Anyway, that's what I wanted to cover today. Like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you in another live stream. It's bye for now.